Hello, nice to see you today. My name is Will, this is my channel Envy Reads, and today I'm going to talk about the books that I read in June. So these are the books that I read in June. There are 13 books, and I'm going to talk about the majority of them. I have not felt like in the mood to talk about books and like synopses and stuff for a while, so I've been putting off doing this video, but I thought we would just like do it today. I'll probably get into it. And the light's probably going to be changing a lot because the sun has been very temperamental and whatnot. The first book I read was Notes on Her Color by Jennifer O'Neill. I just randomly found this book because I was browsing, and it's supposed to be a speculative fiction book, which is a genre that I really love, basically my favorite. I've done some research on speculative fiction, and it's like a lot more than I thought it was, basically. But this follows this girl called Gabriella, and she grows up with a mom and a dad, and her dad is like emotionally abusive, and she's inherited this thing from her mother that makes her able to change the color of her skin, and her father likes it when her mother and her both like make their skin like white, basically. And that's like an element that comes up in the story, and all the commentary around that when it comes to race, how people perceive you, the dangers and the benefits of it, and how it presents itself in her life. Like, it's a very interesting lens to explore this topic through, and I think the book does it really well. The thing that I really didn't like about this book is just like the language in general. It feels very, I am writing a magical realism book, and it's supposed to be like a little bit flowery, and it's just like, it was bland to me and not very strong, like the author voice in this book. Was just not for me. It's not bad, but it was just not for me. Everything was very like spelled out, and not a lot was it insinuated on the page itself. Like, it would tell, not show. Aside from that, like, I loved like a lot about this book. I think the story is really unique, but also very human. I loved like the themes that it explores, and like the complexity of the characters. Like, the character work in this is just phenomenal, and they were all just so layered, and there was so much history and trauma and situational experiences that were just so well explored. And some of my favorite characters and the characters that I hated the most, like, of the year, they were all like in this book. It was just great work, and the story, and the fact that through all of this there was kind of like a happy ending in a way, and the fact that our main character, she, you know, dedicates a lot of her life to playing the piano, and it has its positive and negative effect, especially with her relationship to her mother. It ends up introducing her to someone, and this book is sapphic, and it also has a very beautiful, saving queer relationship and family that takes her in. And I don't want to say too much about the book, but I gave it a solid 4 stars. To me, like, the writing just pulled it down, but the story itself and the characters was really, really good. And if you like, I would call it more magical realism than speculative, because the rules of the magic is very outlined rather than being more speculative, I guess. So yeah, I just found the magic to be like the fact that she can change her skin. It was a little bit too on the nose, even though it was a good tool. But I do also really appreciate how this book explores like dynamic, like patriarchal dynamics and power, all these different themes. Like, I'm excited. Can you tell I'm not in the right headspace to be reviewing books? My God. The next book that I picked up was The C Word by Lindsay King Miller. This is a zombie apocalypse type story, but we start off the book before any of this transpires. So you follow our main character, Wendy, who is bisexual and is just part of the queer community, and the book starts off with this party that is hosted by this lesbian couple, which one of them is trans, and she's there, but her ex is also there. It starts off, it's just like this lesbian queer drama, you know, very typical of the community. I got something in my eye. But then for various reasons, the zombie apocalypse kind of happens. And it's like, it takes a while for it to happen, but the book is just like so entertaining, and its messiness, like you really get drenched in the queer messy dynamics of this book and these characters. And it just gets like heightened with the action, you know. It's a very action-packed book, and I found a lot of it just like really, really funny. And when I started reading it, I read like half the book in one evening, which I was not expecting, just because I found it so page-turning. The weird part is like nothing about this book is really unpredictable, but I was just so intrigued, and it was such a page-turning book. Like the way it's written and stuff, it just felt really fast-paced, and I just wanted to like keep on reading, which I've been finding like I enjoy a lot more than I originally thought, because it's just kind of like a fun, exciting read. It obviously does explore like topics within the queer community and our faults and our strengths within the plot of this book. I have two big critiques of this book, and the biggest one that kind of jarred me is that the characters and people like actually start dying in this book because of the zombie apocalypse. Because it has painted this picture of being kind of more funny and drama, when these deaths kind of happen, the grief didn't feel like it was explored properly. And I think if you are going through grief and you read something like this, it can feel quite jarring because it wasn't taking the time it should, because obviously that's like a huge deal, like your partner or someone in your life, a friend, like dying. But the book wasn't written to deal with this type of scenario, and I felt that was kind of like, ooh. And on top of that, the ending, there's this scene that just wasn't really necessary. It didn't need to wrap up so nicely, kind of nicely in air quotation quotes. But I found the critiques of like pride and capitalism interesting within all of this as well. So I gave it 4.5 stars. Had a really good time with this, and I recommend if like this type of book is for you. The next book that I read was The Rain Artist by Claire Rudy Foster. I was intrigued by this book because the cover is really beautiful, and it is AI art, and someone posted this, I'll put it here, critique of how the book is supposed to criticize, you know, technology's effect on artistry, and then to have an IA cover kind of seems hypocritical. But this artist is called like Nice Aunties or something, is an artist that uses AI to do art. So it is an actual human who does this kind of art. I personally don't have a problem with it. It could have been a thing to back up kind of the arguments of this book. Unfortunately, to me, that theme completely fails to be present in this book. This is a near future sci-fi dystopian book following 4 different characters, but our main character is a umbrella artist and maker. And because in this world, like, rain is extremely scarce, the only very, very top 1%, or I don't know, 0.01% are able to have access to rain, and they host these rain parties that are very exclusive where they make it rain and they need umbrellas for that. And she's the only rainbow maker umbrella maker left in the world. And action starts to happen and unravel where the characters that we are following kind of meet and interact with each other, and they end up being on the run for various reasons. La-di-da, yada. I was so deeply disappointed by this book because it seemed like everything that I would possibly want in a book, essentially. A book that is both climate fiction, a sci-fi with cool technology, queer characters I was promised, speculative elements, like all of these things, like themes of art and capitalism. You know, like, I should love this book. It was supposed to be everything I've ever wanted in a book, which is why I feel so strongly towards how much I dislike this book, because I feel like nothing makes sense. The world building was just awful in the way that they kept driving home certain points about the fact that like the technology and surveillance was so extreme, and yet I feel like they completely failed to capture them or actually show up, even though they told me it was very extreme, but apparently not. Stuff like that didn't make sense. A character just randomly knew how to fly an airplane at some point because of convenience. It kind of paints itself as being this like very political and like on the nose book, but it completely fails to prove anything or make any sort of point about themes whatsoever. I have no clue what this book is actually about, except like one-liners critique of our world, which are just so obvious and to me kind of boring. And I feel like a book like this, like your whole purpose is to make me think about stuff, to imagine different futures and what we're doing now and how we got there. And it just like did not make me think about anything because everything was so poorly developed. And despite the fact that like textures of fabrics and certain things are described, I like could not visualize this. The environment, like the visual of the city, it takes place in New York, I think, by the way, future New York. And I was so mad. Like when I finished this book, I was just fuming. I was like, okay, but it's queer though. So maybe it's for someone. Maybe I can recommend it to someone as a queer book. Both the women in this book are technically gay, but it's revealed in one line from each character, insinuation in one conversation, and it's an insinuated line that doesn't even like show up in the story otherwise. And because this is book one, yes, I assume that their queerness is gonna become more evident in like the following books, but I'm not gonna be reading the following books because this sucked. I still gave it 2.5 stars because it was engaging. It was easy to read. I was flipping the pages, but I started off like very hopeful about where the story was going. I started off into it, but as I was reading, I was just becoming more and more disappointed in it. It was just like watching a train wreck happen because it was just so, what's the word? So bad at doing what it was trying to do, which is like the worst critique ever, in my opinion, you know? So, not a fan, which is very sad because this book does look nice and it was supposed to be everything I loved, which is probably why I'm as mad as I am. Gah. Hello. Next book. It Lasts Forever and Then It's Over by Anne DeMarkin. This book is another zombie apocalypse book. Funny, like last month, I think I read 3 or 4 books that ended up being werewolf books. And then this month I ended up reading 2 books that are zombie books. Just a coincidence. So I saw this originally on Malls by Moonlight's Instagram page and she really loved it and it seemed like something I could love too. This follows this girl who is a zombie. The zombie apocalypse has happened. She is a zombie and she's at this hotel with all these other zombies. There's not much plot otherwise. The story does progress and she moves but mostly it's about the grief that she goes through, the loss she feels, and not only for her life and herself, but specifically for her partner that is dead for whatever reason that we don't really ever get to know about. It's kind of a little bit body horror. There's one point in sort of the start where she takes this dead crow and binds it to her chest. So it explores grief in different forms. Oh yeah, one part that I forgot to say, she's losing memories from her past, so she doesn't remember everything, and that's also why we as the reader do not get like a lot of answers to the questions we have, which I was like sometimes screaming at the page like, who are you? What happened? I want to know, you know? But she also doesn't know everything. So it's a lot about just like the emotions and exploration and the journey of how to process the reality, essentially. I really like this book. I ended up giving it 5 stars. It is not a new favorite, but I feel similar towards this book as I do for this book that I now can't remember the name of, that I also gave a very high rating of. I don't feel necessarily emotionally attached to it, but I loved everything that the book did. And I don't say this often, but I would reread this when I'm in a different headspace, or even if I'm going through something similar. I wasn't immediately like on board with the writing in this book. I felt at times almost weird into like a little cheesy, but I decided to just like commit myself to being into it, and the experience for me got better as I was reading it. It's quite horrifying. There's some scenes, like if you've read it, the scene with the older lady, when I read that, I was just like, I had to clutch my pearls a little bit because there's some horrifying stuff in here. Loved the ending. love, love, love the ending, which is like, I love when an ending is good. It's so important to me. But there's also some weird choices in here. It gets rather silly at times. I love silly and horror together. It's one of my favorite combos, together with like a strong message. And I also love reading books about grief. But there was a weird choice in this, specifically for like the whole baseball team section. Didn't really understand it, to be honest. If you read this, I would like to hear your take on it. It's not labeled as queer, this book, but there is specifically one passage in this book that reveals that the main character's partner was a woman and that they were both women. But it's not a large part of the book, but I think it's enough to say that this book is sapphic. I believe that quite strongly. But now that I'm talking about it, I'm like, should I just read this again? After that, I ended up reading these 4 books for a reading blog that I was doing, where I was reading books with the title that share a name with a song from a playlist that I have. So I'm not going to be talking about these books in this video like I have been doing like this whole year. So if you want my thoughts on these books, then you can check out that video. I will link it in the cards and down below. But that was really fun, and I had a good time with all of these books. And this was the only non-queer book that I read this month. Yay me! Then I picked up this book. This is Cecilia by Ming Chung, my second book by Chung, and I'm excited to have read something else by her because I liked Bestiary, but I was curious to see what else she could do, specifically like within the horror genre, which, yeah, I should have read Organ Meats. I know, I'll get to it. Okay. But I just saw this in the bookstore and I was like, wow, how stunning is this book? So I ended up getting it. This book is about our main character that I don't know the name of, or if we ever got a name. She's working at this physical therapy place. She's a cleaner. And then one day, a woman from her past, like her past best friend, walks in and is a client there. And that's all you need to know, really. Other than that, like what happens in the rest of the book, like the actual nowadays plot of the book, it's like nothing. The majority of this book actually takes place in the past. I would say almost 80% of the book is the main character thinking about the past relationship she had with this woman when they were children. Also like the past when it comes to like her family dynamics and her childhood. And to be honest, like this is another thing I recently discovered. I'm not a huge fan of when the majority of the book, or even 50%, takes place in the past. Like I prefer it when it's like all of it is taking place like in the present plot of the book, or if it's like sprinkled in more in like max 25%. This was just basically a book about her life, her past relationship with it, and so little happened in now time that it didn't click for me. I didn't feel the thing. It made me kind of disappointed because I also feel like a lot of the themes were very similar to Bestiary. I'm hoping that her repertoire is like more wide than this. Because I personally also didn't enjoy like the family part that this book explored. Like I wanted more specifically weird things to happen between the main character and this other woman in nowadays, because it has this undertone of horror and erotic, but neither of those come to fruition in any way. It's just the way that Ming Chung writes that insinuates or expresses this feeling or emotion, both of like horror and erotica, which I do find interesting, and I think a lot of people will really love this. It's just not for me. The lesbian pining without resolution, not for me. But I understand why it could be for like a lot of people. It's well written. It's really well written. I mean, I think it's unarguable that Ming Chung is a great writer. When I was writing notes about this, I said that it feels like it was an unspoken, assumed closure that left me feeling like I wanted so much, much more. Yeah. I gave it how many stars? 3.25. It's not bad. It was just not for me. I finally got to pick up Little Rot by Kwekemezi. I just happened to go to the bookstore the day this was released and was just like, oh my god, I have to get it. I have to read it tonight. So I ended up reading this entire book in one day. I was on the train visiting my mom and I just basically read it that entire day. This is Akwaeke Emezi's new release and it takes place in Lagos, Nigeria, I believe. You start off following these two characters, I don't remember any names, Aima and Kalu. Aima and Kalu have been together for 4 years and they end up breaking up, and Kalu is giving Aima a ride to the airport where she's gonna fly back to the UK, I believe. She ends up not taking the flight and goes back to her best friend in Lagos and doesn't tell Kalu that she didn't actually leave the country. The relationship gets fraught because she rediscovers her love and her connection to religion and really wants to get married, and he was just not ready to get married. And that's kind of like their relationship. I don't even know why I'm explaining this to you because the book is not really about that at all. There is just like a vast array of characters. I think it takes place over one weekend. Each character's chapter is like time-stamped with when this happens, and sometimes a character will like show up in another person's like life or whatever, and then you'll be like, oh my god, what happened there that these people met or communicated, and then the next chapter will be that other person and how they got there. And I just thought it was so clever, like such a clever tool to like keep the reader reading and like engaged, even though this is like not really a mystery or any like a thriller. It's just so page turning. At least I found it really page turning. I'm also just really obsessed with Akwaeke Emezi's writing. And this book, I think, plays off a little bit of the scandalous element of like the topics that it's talking about, and essentially wants to communicate that when you're in a city or in a community where everything is so decaying, like socially and politically, you become part of that rot, which is the message of the book, sort of. I think the biggest trigger warning in this, which I think can be a deal breaker for a lot, is that there's like pedophilia in this. It's very graphic and can be difficult to read about, and sexual assault and stuff like that. I love the different characters, like how they connected, their plots, and the fact that as you're reading, it just gets thicker and thicker. Like the plot just thickens, like so much more than I was expecting, and it was so satisfying. And the end resolution, I think I saw it coming quite early on, and I like gasped when I realized, I'm like, surely not. Anyways, it was a 5-star. I loved it. I think the breadth of Akwaeke Emezi's like writing is just incredible. Even though I don't like their young adult, everything else has been a huge hit for me. Sometimes when I'm writing like notes in a book, I write it so much better than I can possibly say, which makes me want to read what I write, which is like, also there's no nothing wrong in that. I wrote, Akwaeke is also great at weaving queerness to the foundations of the story, casually and realistically. Specifically with this one, and also with You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty, where queerness is not the central role, but it's woven in like a very realistic way that I do really appreciate. With that being said, I do think the story has something to explore in regards to men and women's role in the book. Women seem to be the caretakers and the saviors, although the men were the drama. I'm thinking the gender roles were intentional in the discussions around morality and society. So I think there's a lot more to be discussed with this book, and I think although it portrays itself as more of like a thriller-like drama, I think there's a lot to it, and sometimes I wonder if Akwaeke releases a book and then they sit there like, who's gonna start critiquing this book? Who's gonna, pinpoint stuff and things that I do? I don't know. That's just how I picture. I feel like Akwaeke is testing us. I can't really explain it. But anyways, that was that. On the bus back, I took a bus from Oslo to Copenhagen, which is 8.5 hours on the bus. But it was okay because I read this book the entire time. This is Body After Body by Briar Ripley Page. I read another book by Briar Ripley Page this year called The Corrupted Vessels, and I was curious to look into more of their work, and this was like a longer piece of their work because Corrupted Vessels is very short, and I wanted something that was like just more. And so I picked up Body After Body, and this is only available on itch.io, I believe, as an ebook. This is like a futuristic sci-fi body horror, super trance, which I love. It follows this factory where the bottom workers who are working there are only called Johns and Jennies, and the majority of them are trans, either trans men or trans women, and we get to learn why as the story progresses. And what they're there to do at this factory in the future is that they're supposed to take care of these bodies that are in capsules, and they are bodies that are produced for extra organs. A lot of them have mutations that like the rich upper class would like to have, like they want gills or ears or tails, or they need an extra liver, stuff like this, that the bodies are being harvested to them, and the Johns and Jennies are just working there taking care of the bodies. The thing is that the Johns and Jennies, they have to sign a contract where they relinquish all of their memories from before to work there for a set amount of years, and then they get their life back. In exchange, the facility will do any type of surgery or medical thing that that person needs, and which is why a lot of poor Johns and Jennies come there to work. And we learn more about this facility as the story goes on. It is very explicit in so many ways, like both like explicit in like a lot of the erotica that goes on in this book, but also with the body horror and specifically also cannibalism. It is just, I really enjoyed it. It was also one of those like fast-paced books, but with also so much depth. I think this book could have really benefited from having a professional editor, to be honest. It might have had one, but I think if it was published in physical format and someone got to like read it over, I think it could be even better, because some of the choices when it came to like the chapters and the perspectives and the way it was written, I thought was a little off. But the basis of the story, the messaging, the layers of just like trans discussion and trans experience, trans vengeance and rage and injustice, and also just like capitalism and classism, like it's so good. I really enjoyed it. I only gave it, I was like 4 stars is kind of low, but the writing just really matters to me, and the way you ingest the story is through the writing. So to me, like the writing is enough to put it down 1 star, but the story itself is amazing. It also has like a bit of a speculative element towards the end, which I really loved. And like the fact that you didn't get all the answers, but got the plot twists and the turns, and like it was really good. I really enjoyed it. And I'm excited to like have read something else by Briar Ripley Page. Oh, I also wrote in my review, in many ways, the story is quite dark and it's tragic, but also powerful in its message. How liberation looks different in different people and sometimes grotesque. The body horror was very effective. It was also a little bit too much for me sometimes. Cannibalism is something that reoccurs a lot in self-published online itch.io trans literature, and I don't know why. I don't know why. What's up with the trans masks and the cannibalism? Someone needs to tell me. Gosh, I'm really rambling on about this book. I have 2 more books to talk about for this video. This is Wild Geese by Sola Emanuel. I wanted to pick up this book. It's a contemporary book that also takes place over a weekend. I guess another theme of my reading in June. I wanted to pick up this book because it takes place in Copenhagen, and our main character, she's studying and working at a university in Lund, which is Sweden. So there's a lot of fun Swedish and Danish like references and cultural things in this that made me really want to like read it, and because I live in Denmark and I'm Swedish, so I thought that was like really fun. And also like viewing it from more of like diaspora like experience, I thought was interesting. But essentially you follow this trans woman who lives in an apartment that's not really hers. She's just living there, and one day when she comes home, her ex from 8 years ago, I believe, shows randomly up at her doorstep and is like, hi, because our main character is from Ireland, I believe. So it's like a little strange that her Irish ex is now on her Copenhagen doorstep. And so the book follows the weekend that these 2 characters spend together. That's the plot of the book. So this book made me think about a lot of things. Like I really enjoyed how accurate Sola is in capturing Danish and Swedish culture. Like that's why there's like tabs, because there was some lines that I was just like, oh my god, this is like just so on point for like how Swedes like to represent themselves, or how Danish culture is, or like, and she writes it in such like a specific way that is just so spot on, and also really nicely written, even when it comes to like trans experiences. When she's on a topic, she like hits it right on the nail, and I really appreciate that. And this book is written in a very intellectualization way of feeling and experiences, and I think in many ways it makes sense for the main character, who does struggle with, I think, feeling her own emotions, and is just kind of overthinking everything. But I think that has an impact on how we as the reader experience the book, because I think it keeps at least me from being emotionally invested in the book when the book focuses more on intellectualizing and describing feelings rather than feeling the feelings. Which I think is interesting, and the language in this is also super interesting. It pushes itself a little bit too far into sounding not natural, but very beautifully written. But that's just for my taste. And that also goes for like the dialogue in this. It does feel like very scripted, like the dialogue does not feel natural, but it also makes the dialogue really funny, and there's quite a lot of like really funny moments. But like, as I was reading this book, I became less and less engaged with the story. It felt a little bit too much of the same, and yet, yeah, I wish something different would have happened. It just didn't end up being kind of a favorite. I gave it 4 stars as well. I wish it would have made me feel more, and that's like my main critique. I wasn't feeling it, even though the experiences of our main character, what's her name, Phoebe, feels very relatable in so many ways, and especially like the overarching story of like how one weekend or a specific moment in time can feel like really impactful and life-changing, and the people and relationship that comes into your life, even though short, can be profound. And I do also like the exploration of like her ex, who's a cis woman, and our main character is a trans woman, the different ways they experience womanhood and the world, and kind of how much they have in common and the things they have different, was also very nice to read about. But I did really appreciate like how it made me think about a lot of things, like specifically for my own life and the way I experience things and the relationships I have and like my past, and like it just made me think about things, which I really like and appreciate. I would say though that it's clear that this book, that the author has not lived in Copenhagen, because she lives in like Frederiksberg, which is like fairly a posh area. Like they get less taxes because they're like, and the places that she visits and stuff are just kind of very stereotypically touristy things, which also makes sense for the story that she's like showing her ex around. But I wanted there to be more like niche specific places that I could recognize, you know? But also like the gay bar in this, like the name's not that, it's changed. And when they were at the gay bar and a character comes up, I'm like, I wonder if I know this person in real life, because I never read books about towns and stories that take place in the city where I live. So in my head, I'm like, I knew the characters in this because they were in Copenhagen, so maybe I would have met them, but that makes no sense. But it was just such a funny experience. Anyways, I'm gonna leave this now. We have one more book to talk about for this video, and that's Queer Little Nightmares, an anthology of monstrous fiction and poetry, edited by David Lee and Daniel Samparelli. This is a queer horror anthology, which is why I wanted to read it. And I've been reading this kind of on and off for many, many months now, which has definitely like lessened my enjoyment and experience of this book. I just ended up not being a huge fan, I think because I was expecting it to be more horror, but instead it kind of focuses more on mythical creatures and more fantasy elements than like actual horror, which is what I wanted. If I knew how much fantasy was in this and how, you know, like humorous some of them are, and it's less about the horror, I think, even though some are, you know, then I probably wouldn't have picked it up. Like, I think this cover is a good representation of the book, and when I got this and wanted to read this, like I wasn't judging the book by the cover, but I should have. Most of these are like fairly well written, but as a collection, what bothered me the most is the fact that I don't feel like this like the stories and poems in this, I feel like don't belong together because they have such a wide range of energy and genres feeling to them. Like there was one story in the middle, the one about the period or whatever, that was like genuinely really, really nasty and I hated it, but I wanted more of that. That's such a weird critique. I wanted more of my least favorite story in this. No, wasn't my least favorite story. But a lot of them just felt like young adult, and then there would be one that was like definitely adult, and the poems just didn't fit into it. So I just felt like as a collection, and as I was reading this, it just didn't make sense. And I think that's what bothered me the most about this, and not specifically the individual stories, but most of the individual stories I also didn't really care for. So unfortunately, this was not for me. I find that anthologies are often not for me. Those are all the books that I read last month. Let's order them. Let's do it. So this is the order I would give the books in order of enjoyment, including the 4 books that I had in my vlog. Body After Body would probably be above this book, I think. But yeah, a lot of great reads this month, a very 4-star month. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Comment down below if you read any of these, your thoughts on them, what great books or not so great books you read in the month of June. I think that's it for this video. I wish you all an amazing, beautiful day. Take care of yourself and your loved ones, and I will talk with all of you soon. Goodbye.